All right, we are now live at 7 o'clock. We're going to wait for some people to filter in. I know Zoom can take a little bit of time. So while we're waiting for those numbers to go up, if you guys want to just chat away, go for it.
So I'm in North Carolina and you guys are both in Corvallis, right?
Yeah.
I'm close
Where
by.
is-
I'm in Eugene, but 40 minutes away.
So Eugene and Corvallis are within an hour of each other?
Mhm.
That's right.
Okay. And how far are those from Portland?
Like an hour.
Let's see. Corvallis is about an hour and a half south. Eugene's about 2 hours.
Okay.
Kind of like what is it? UNC and Duke?
Kind of, yeah. Well, they're just 8 or 10 miles away.
Oh, I didn't realize they were that close.
I'm in Greensboro, which is about 45 minutes from Chapel Hill. And then Chapel Hill's another, or maybe 10 to 15 minutes from Durham, which is where Duke is. And then Raleigh's another 20 minutes from Durham. So everything's pretty close, you know. Charlotte's about an hour and a half from where I am. It's the coast is about 3.5 hours away.
A lot of good basketball teams out there.
Yes, yeah. I was pleased to, and I told you I wouldn't do any research on the book so I could come in cold, but I couldn't help noticing in my book the basketball references in the book. So, and obviously there's an element of that in there.
Yeah, that's my association from North Carolina is besides Kitty Hawk.
Yeah.
You got Duke, you got North Carolina, you got North Carolina State, you got Wake Forest, all powerhouse basketball programs. Out here we've got Oregon and Oregon State, which are turning into powerhouses. They both had good years this year, but
Oregon State made it to the Elite Eight, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
But I think the proximity just feeds the rivalry, like maybe with Duke and North Carolina.
Yeah, and the Trailblazers have always been pretty good.
All right, guys, I'm seeing a pretty steady number. As fun as sports talk is, we're here for a book. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you JT and James for being here. My name is Courtney. I'm the event coordinator at Grassroots Bookstore in Corvallis, Oregon. And today we are so excited to have here with us JT Bushnell for the happy hour book launch of his book, The Step Back. And we're also super excited that this event is being co-sponsored by Block 15, a local brewery here in Corvallis, Oregon. We're so excited for this night, and we have some great things in store for all of you who are watching tonight. But first, I'd like to introduce JT and his conversation partner for the evening, James Tate Hill. JT Bushnell teaches writing and literature at Oregon State University. His fiction has been published in 20 literary journals, and his essays about writing appear in Poets and Writers, The Writer, Fiction Writers Review, where he is a contributing editor. And The Step Back is his first novel. JT, you also go by JT, James Tate Hill is the author of the memoir Blind Man's Bluff, a Lit Hub most anticipated book of 2021, coming in August from W.W. Norton. He serves as fiction editor for Monkey Bicycle, and his fiction debut, Academy Gothic, won the Nilson Literary Prize for a first novel. Okay, so the way that this event is going to work is that we're going to have JT kick us off with a reading from his new book. And then we're going to have that followed by a conversation between JT and James, and then we'll wrap everything up with an audience Q&A. So for the audience Q&A portion, please feel free to ask questions at any time during JT's reading and both the conversation, and put those questions into the Q&A chat box, and then we'll use that at the end to run the audience Q&A. And then I will also be putting the I will be putting the link to buy The Step Back in the chat shortly. And we highly encourage you to buy that from our bookstore, Grassroots. Not only will you be supporting JT as an author, but you'll also be supporting Grassroots, a local indie bookstore that's able to bring events like this to you. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to let JT take it away.
Thank you. And Grassroots brings so much to Corvallis and to OSU. Most of the readings that I've been to, Grassroots is there selling books. They're just a fixture in our community. So it really is valuable to support them if you can. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Grassroots for hosting me. Thank you to Block 15 for their generous donation. We got a big stack of beer here, and we're giving it away tonight. So I'm going to explain how it's going to work in just a moment. But first, I want to encourage everyone to please go ahead. If you don't already have a beverage in front of you, please go grab one of your favorite beverages, whether it's beer or something less delicious. Please help me celebrate. This is my debut novel, and it's a big moment for me, and I'm going to take a moment right now to go ahead and crack one. So join me, please. Cheers. Okay, so things I enjoyed most about writing this book was running into all the secondary characters, getting a chance to meet them, get to know them, developing them. And I'd really just like to read to you about some of the secondary characters that my protagonist comes across in his journey towards his coming of age. So a quick synopsis. This is a moment in the protagonist's life. He's 18 years old. He's about to graduate from high school. It's a moment that I think a lot of us have felt I think everyone, it's a difficult breaking moment when you move from childhood to adulthood, whether that threshold that you're crossing is going to college or anything else. It requires kind of relinquishing your identity, relinquishing your past connections, relinquishing the things that either sustain or hurt you. And so it makes it an exciting enterprise or a difficult and lonely enterprise. And for my character, Ed, this is exacerbated by the disintegration of his family. And not just of his family as a whole, but kind of the obliteration of each personality and identity of each family member. So his mother comes out as gay and moves across the country, which is kind of an identity that he doesn't understand, that he's never applied to her before. The father, in reaction to this, and in reaction to his pain, becomes withdrawn and sort of quick-tempered in a way that is very unlike him. And the little brother sort of rebels and becomes defiant in ways that are typical in adolescence. But again, it's a big change. So my character is not just crossing or trying to cross the threshold to adulthood, but he's also lost a lot along the way. So he enters college sort of anchorless, rudderless, trying to grasp onto something that will replace the meaning and purpose that he found, both in his family and in activities like basketball, which for him have come to represent a kind of alternate family of his teammates. So that's where we are. He has come to college. He's a freshman, and this is where the first section picks up. Okay. I found myself playing a drinking game with a few people I didn't know and gulping sweetened alcohol more quickly than I should have. When the game ended, I drifted into conversation with the girl sitting next to me, a columnist named Brittany Mercer. He's a newspaper reporter for the college paper. She was a senior, slim and well-tanned, her bleached hair styled to look like ramen noodles. She was telling me that she hated when people complained about divorce. It's like, oh God, big deal. Everyone gets divorced now, she said. I'm always like, do you have any idea what's been going on in Bosnia? Have you ever heard of apartheid? Matthew Shepard gets killed, our president gets impeached, but no, please, tell me about how awful your parents' divorce was. I watched her lips move and melted with agreement. When she asked why my parents had split up, I said I suspected my mother of an affair. You should ask her, Brittany said. I did. I asked my dad straight up if there was another woman, and he was like, that's not the point. And I was like, no, that pretty much is the point. At least you were asking your dad. She looked at me, confused, about whether there was another woman. Later, she put her hand on my knee, and the next thing I knew, we were lying in a carpeted hallway as discreetly as we could, swirling our tongues in each other's mouths. Afterward, I offered to walk her home. It was drizzling and very dark between the orange pools of lamplight, but that didn't stop us from pushing each other against truck cabs and alley walls, the soft rain wetting our faces, and the smell of her hair product closing over us. Okay, so my character is sort of chasing romance to replace the basketball that replaced his family. You heard a reference to a few things in there, apartheid, Bosnia, and Matthew Shepard. I remember when Matthew Shepard was killed, but I don't remember the moment that I learned the news. My next question for you is, what's the first news story that you remembered where you were when you heard it, and where were you? For me, it was when the Challenger shuttle exploded. I was in 5th grade and I was sitting in class. I see someone with a Challenger, and it was very devastating. We felt connected as young children because there was a teacher on board, and teachers were a big part of our life. I also remember when I see a lot of really great ones. I remember Princess Di. I remember where I was too. That was a big one for me. And the other big one was when there was the shooting at Thurston in Springfield, which is in Oregon. It happened right before Columbine, so people have forgotten it. But I was in high school at the time, and I remember sitting in class and the teacher turning on, Mr. Phelps, turning on the TV and letting us see what had happened. Okay, so the next character I'm going to read to you about is also romantic, becomes a romantic interest for Ed. She is the character that every early reader for me told me was their favorite. She's the kind of character that I think every novel needs. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that after I read the section, I guess. Okay. The only option I could find was a room for rent in a little bungalow in town. It had mildew-stained siding and roof shingles barely visible under beds of moss. The front door was turquoise, and the woman who opened it was incredibly short. She looked to be in her early 30s, her face hard and shiny with sweat, pretty except for her eyes, which were recessed in dark sockets, her expression hovering between cynical humor and depression. Her hair was copper-colored from a bad bleach job, chopped at the neck, swirled and calicked as if she'd just gotten out of bed. She had bruised arms and a butterfly tattoo smudged on her ankle. She said her name was Tanya Schmidt. She asked my name and then the puppy's, and by now, I had said it so many times that I'd lost my reservations about choosing a name as feminine and pretentious as Paris. It was apt for a poodle, I thought. Besides, Paris was the guy who'd eloped with Helen of Troy, the archer who'd put the arrow in Achilles' Achilles. It was a cool name, a masculine name, or so I'd convinced myself until I said it to this prospective landlord. Are you gay? She responded. The word felt barbed, but I worried that struggling too much against it would only tangle me up more. I made myself smile. No, why? She shrugged, yawning, and started the tour. In the bathroom, there was a pedestal sink stained with rust, a clawfoot tub. She invited me to step through the shower curtain, and when I did, examining the old fixtures, she told me, no jerking off in there. Anywhere else is fine, but I don't want to step in it. I nodded, turning down the corners of my mouth, the expression of a reasonable man settling upon a reasonable compromise. I was further shocked when I sat down with her to sign the paperwork and deliver my check, and she told me, over an enormous mug of coffee, that she actually didn't give a shit. I could jerk it wherever I liked. I just wanted to see how you'd react, she said. If you're the kind of guy who gets his panties in a bunch, you probably shouldn't live here. The floor sloped, doors stuck. The kitchen window was painted shut. It was small and cramped and hot and had only one bathroom. And I'd never lived in such close proximity to a woman. But there was a fenced backyard, and the rent was reasonable, and I didn't have any other options. I signed the forms, tore off a check. I asked, do you mind if I leave Paris in the yard while I get settled? Leave him anywhere you want. I like dogs. I used to have one, but my ex-husband took him. Well, soon-to-be ex-husband. He just moved out. He was the kind of guy who got his panties in a bunch. You wouldn't know it from looking at him, but it's true. He freaked out if he saw my tampon in the garbage and never took off his shirt so I wouldn't see his keloid scars. She was sitting across the kitchen table, elbows on its surface, both hands holding the coffee above a slab of afternoon sunlight, her face as easy and comfortable as if she was telling me about the idiosyncrasies of the water pressure. So I call this character, Tanya, a catalyst character. I think most novels have this kind of catalyst character, a secondary character who's brash or willing enough to cross boundaries, that they push the story into territory that it otherwise wouldn't go. You can probably see it happening already with a couple passages that may be sort of uncomfortable to read out loud. My question for you is, what other novels can you think of that have this kind of catalyst character? Like, I'm thinking of in Revolutionary Road, the character John Givings, if you're familiar with that book, or in The Color Purple, the character Shug Avery is another kind of secondary character that pushes the protagonist and the action into territory that wouldn't go. So maybe think of the most recent novel you've read, or for the other authors out there, your own novels. What are the other catalyst characters that operate this way? And we'll also have a nice list of novels to take with us for our reading list. I see a few. Pua and the Prophets, thanks Desi. That's a harder question, I'm sorry. Whiskey When You're Dry. Who's the character in Whiskey When You're Dry? Okay, so I'm going to read you about one more character, also a romantic interest. I don't think she needs any setup or further explanation. Okay. Well, except this. The character Ed has joined the newspaper editing staff. At the newspaper, I had a team, and I liked my new teammates. But there was one teammate who especially interested me, the photo editor, Lucienne Close. She was tall and gaunt, her face haunted with the gritty, sensual look of hunger. She wore exciting clothes, pieces more formal and daring than anyone else on campus. Her expression was by turns contemptuous and sedate. She had a habit of avoiding eye contact. She rarely smiled. She seemed to be sheltering some kind of pain or fear that had darkened her opinion of the world. All these things and more made my heart race. Lucienne worked at the computer next to mine, close enough to swaddle me in the heady smell of her perfume while we labored through Sunday night to assemble the weekly issue. I asked her about everything I could think of as we worked, her weekend, her classes, her background and tastes. She answered without elaboration, her voice somber, as if she was afraid of exposing her secrets. I did manage to pick up a few tidbits. She was from the East Coast. Where exactly, I could never pin down. She referenced 4 or 5 different cities and seemed to have gone to school at all of them. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, she wore all black for 2 weeks. But when I asked, with compassion and deference, if she'd known any of the victims, her only response was, "I must have." Her parents had apparently shipped her to a woods every summer for an all-girls camp, where the dirt and insects and older campers had inflicted various traumas upon her. She'd been allowed to sip red wine since grade school, but had been prohibited from dating until her 18th birthday. When I asked how much she'd dated since then, she responded quickly, "Plenty." Then she glanced at me and let her eyes drop to the keyboard. "It's only been a year," she said. She'd come to the West Coast to escape her parents. When I asked if they were still married, her response was, "Ostensibly." When I asked why she'd selected Sequoia College, she was quiet a moment. "Admissions are rigged," she said. "They don't look at the right things." Her photos were adequate, not sensational. Some were weird. Empty bleachers, roadkill, a giant nipple. She liked to pitch these to the section editors, explaining their tangential relation to whatever stories they were running that week. Her voice flat and hopeless, already resigned to a refusal. One week she wanted me to run the football story with a photo of a mannequin lying in a ditch. She said it expressed the de-individuation that team sports inflicted on athletes. "Personally, I love the idea," I said, not wanting to insult her. "But do you think our readers will be smart enough to get it?" She didn't argue. She converted the photo to grayscale, printed it, and taped it to the wall alongside her many other disturbing shots. I made a point to compliment the strangest of them, explaining the abstractions I saw, and she furrowed her brow thoughtfully in a way that seemed to hide her pleasure. Okay, I would love to read more to you, and if we were all in a room together, I would definitely read more. but that's it for the reading portion. I have one more question. So my character Ed, as maybe you can perceive even from these brief excerpts, is always replacing something in his life. His family falls apart, he tries to replace it with basketball. Basketball falls apart, he replaces it with running and newspaper work and other teams that he finds. So my question for all of you is, have you ever lost an activity that seems like more than just an activity, that seems like part of your identity, and that you lose a little piece of your identity when it goes away? I didn't lose basketball. When I went to college, I kept playing basketball, pickup ball. It was one of my favorite activities. I see a lot of good ones. Some athletic enterprises, some not. So I didn't lose that piece of me at that time, but more recently as a runner, I was injured for, a year or two and couldn't run. And that really felt sort of identity altering. It was hard for me to think of myself as me without that. I see a lot of really good ones: band, running, cheer, saxophone, military. Oh yeah, I bet. Climbing. Oh no. LSD. I don't know if that's a joke, Oliver, although maybe not. These are some really good ones. Thank you everyone for these responses. It's been really nice to see your presence in your comments. So yeah, that's the end of the reading. I'll hand it off to the other JT now, or James, I think we're referring to you here.
Yeah, we've got to keep it straight. This is so it's nice to have a namesake in the room, the Zoom room. You know, I had a different first question, but excuse me, what your last question sort of made me think there were times in my writing career where I thought writing was going to be taken away from me, or at least I was going to have to take it away from myself because it wasn't going where I thought it would go. I think most writers have probably been there at some point. And you had a piece in Poets and Writers a couple of years ago about the sort of fallow period where you're recharging. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what led you to this novel, what refueled you, or what led to your rebirth, the rebirth of your writing mojo.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really optimistic framing of that question, JT. Thank you. So yeah, the article ran in the fall, and it was called Why We Write, which is a regular feature for Poets and Writers. And my subtitle was And Why We Stopped, because I had stopped writing, and I have still stopped writing. I've produced a few articles about writing recently. But the main reason there's a lot of reasons I stopped. The reason I wrote about in the article was becoming a father. And at the time I was really busy with my day job, which is teaching at OSU. I was doing a lot of course development. And so to work on this novel, the one that I read from you tonight, in order to work on revisions of that novel, the moments after I stepped away from my day job, I would sit down at my desk and have to close the door on my family. And you know, I would hear the baby crying, I'd hear the baby laughing, then I'd hear the baby knocking, then I'd hear the baby saying, "Daddy," and closing that door just became unbearable. It felt like I was stealing something from myself and the people I love the most that wasn't worth whatever I put on the page. Of course, that was before the pandemic, when I love my family, but we see a lot of each other. So the thing that's keeping me from writing right now is just time. I mean, there's no time. My wife has a job, I have a job, we have 2 kids and no daycare, so we're just constantly scrambling. So that's what's standing in the way now. At the time that I wrote the article, I guess I was wondering if I had still the impulse to do it. And that was the really scary thing. That was the thing that made me feel not like myself, that challenged my sense of identity. And what I've come to realize during this pandemic is I do still have the impulse. I don't know if I'll be able to do it well ever again, which is always the way I feel after I finish a project. I've never finished one this big, but I always wonder if I'll ever be able to do it well again, because it feels like I won't. But the impulse, I think, is there. Every moment that I have, every little spare moment, I have the impulse to go back.
Yeah.
So I think it will work out, but remains to be seen.
And on a happy note, the merging of family with writer success. I loved you posted a video a few weeks back that, when writers' new books come out, one of my favorite things is the social media pictures or videos of the unboxing of the book arrival, and you could hear your was it your daughter in the background while you were unboxing. It was just so sweet. And
I mean, this project predates her so much, but so I've been working. I started this novel 10 years ago. I started it in 2010.
Wow.
So I guess 11 years ago, when she was not even a twinkle in my eye. But one great thing that came from it taking so long is that now she's at an age where she can comprehend what it means for this book to arrive, what it means to open this box and take out the book. And yeah, I watched the video over and over again, and I can't tear my eyes away from her. She keeps saying, the step back. And to hear her say that is like, even more special than taking the book out of the box. So
yeah.
Thank you, James.
Yeah.
Great question.
So what speaking of children and creativity and where ideas come from and where creativity comes from, where do you trace your creativity? Has it always been writing? How far back does it go?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried various creative enterprises. I took and enjoyed art in high school, jewelry making. I played piano. I learned to play the guitar after college, but I was not good at any of them. I mean, and not just, I mean, I was not bad. I was just mediocre. And I think that people have been generous to say that I was anything other than mediocre in writing as well. But in writing, there was just the magic. Like, it was just, it felt different to sit down and write. The creativity is tough for me. Maybe you can speak about your own experiences with this, JT, but I feel like my brain, I've come to know the way my mind works better as I've gotten older, and it seems to operate analytically really naturally and organically. The creative part of my brain, I have a lot more trouble accessing, and it requires a lot more work. And I've learned the kind of work it requires, the kind of quietness, the kind of, I have to take the pressure off myself. I have to find ways to convince myself that what I'm doing is just playing and it doesn't really matter. And I found ways to do that. But that's where, when I can tap into that creative part. It's harder for me, and I wonder sometimes if that's why I'm drawn to writing, is because it accesses a side of my brain and my personality that is submissive, that's harder to get to, and so it's more rewarding for it to come out.
Yeah, I don't know if writers are just built differently, that we have this defeatism in us or this insecurity. I think most creative professions or most artistic endeavors have this built-in insecurity, because you have to be both extremely arrogant to think that anyone is going to want to know or feel your ideas or emotions and interact with your what can feel like play, but you also have to be extremely humble if that work is going to be as good as it can be or should be, by listening to your readers or the people who are giving you feedback, and to move further. So it's just simultaneous arrogance and defeat every moment of the writing life. And so I do think that, and you like you said, at least with me, if I can't convince myself that what I'm sitting down to write, whenever I'm sitting down to write it, is in some way better than what I've done before, or different in a really interesting way, then it's really hard to get motivated. And I definitely have had those periods years ago where I could not find my way into the chair.
I think that's so astute, James. I'm nodding and smiling the whole time you're talking, because I know just what you mean about this balance between arrogance and humility. I think that's so astute and so impossible a contradiction to, embody. But you're right. It takes so much arrogance to think people are going to be interested in these little things that I make up. And at the same time, you have to have deep humility to be able to suffer the rejections and to engage in the improvements and advancements that you need to become. I mean, there's, the myth of the writer is that they're this genius who sits down and just sort of, plugs in and turns off and out, out it comes perfectly. Probably thanks to Kerouac, but it's BS. The process of becoming a writer is so much struggle and so much work, like learning any craft. And yeah, it requires a lot of humility to be able to advance, and balancing that humility and arrogance. I don't know. It seems impossible, but
yeah,
we are.
Here we are, extremely humble and self-defeatist, and somehow managing to turn on our computers in the morning when there is time. But I'm a huge basketball fan, and I want to preface this. I don't think this is a sports book, and everything you read suggests that this is a book that has a peripheral element of the protagonist who had a past playing basketball, and then he becomes a runner as well, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, I love when sports makes it into fiction or movies, because there's so much built-in drama. As a sports fan, as a really, really devoted college basketball fan of my West Virginia Mountaineers, you're following not just the individual team, but you're following the stories of these players and their families and the entire history of the program. That's a really long preface to ask. Are you, if you had to name a favorite sports novel? There's not a ton. I have a couple of favorites, and I'll share those. But do you have any sports novels that you look to that sort of got you into the mindset of writing about a basketball player?
Yes, absolutely. Great question. Thank you. To me, the greatest sports novel ever written is The Natural by Bernard Malamud, who, by the way, was an instructor at OSU when it came out.
I did not know that.
Yep. It got made into a famous movie with Robert Redford that have perverted people's understanding of the story. But the novel itself is, it's very much a sports novel. All the action takes place in the realm of sports. For me, what's compelling about sports, following sports in real life, but especially reading about sports, is that the stakes are so much higher than winning and losing a game. So we're talking about the humility and arrogance required in writing. And I think what a lot of people who don't play sports don't realize is that same combination of things is necessary to excel at sports. There's talent, but your talent only takes you so far. The rest requires discipline, sacrifice. Every athlete has had to confront their own limitations. Every athlete has had to contend with loss, has had to put portions of their life aside to pursue their athletic pursuits. So I think what's really interesting about sports stories when there are all these other personal, emotional elements packed in to the pursuit of sports. And so whatever happens on the court or on the field has this resonance that sort of echoes out into the other spheres of their life. I think Bernard Malamud does this really well in The Natural. But you're right that my novel is not a sports novel. Sports is sort of a doorway that opens into the rest of the action. And it's in terms of the page count, a really small element of the novel. And I think the best novels to compare it to are The Sports Writer by Richard Ford. This is a story where sports has an element. Sports are involved, but it's not about sports. Sports are kind of the topic, or actually, sports reporting is the topic under which all the drama is playing out.
Yeah.
The other one is Rabbit Run by John Updike, where there's this ex-basketball player sort of missing his glory days.
Yeah.
he was good at basketball. My character's not. But missing those glory days and sort of inspires him to blow up his life. I think what's really different about those novels and mine is those novels sort of celebrate what we now call toxic masculinity. In Rabbit Run, in John Updike's novel, this move to sort of detach himself from his obligations. The main character, Rabbit Engstrom, decides to just like leave his wife and child because they're weights on him. And this was at a time when conformity was king and individualism was like this rebellion. And so his leaving behind his responsibilities is portrayed as like this victory. And in The Sports Writer, the main character is sort of suffering through the grief of a tragic event in his life, and he buries it. And the novel is about his working on burying it, working about just sort of, celebrating the daily moments and mundane aspects of his life that take him away from it, which is exactly what toxic masculinity is. My novel has both those elements, fleeing responsibility, as well as swallowing feelings and pain. But I think the difference is that ultimately my novel is not a celebration of these things. My novel shows a different avenue toward a different kind of masculinity. And it's not, it's not propaganda. It's not trying to tell people that this is the way to behave, but it's just showing my character Ed makes a lot of bad decisions, like Rabbit Engstrom, like Frank Bascombe in The Sports Writer. But he learns from these things and he grows and he finds another way to behave. And I think that's the big difference between those novels and mine. But all of them use sports as the vehicle to arrive at these bigger, deeper elements.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read and love all those. My three favorite sports novels are in no particular order. North Dallas 40, which is a pretty good Nick Nolte movie back in the 70s. It's by Peter Gent or Gent, I'm not sure, I've not heard his last name said out loud. It's really, really funny. It's also a very shaggy plot, but if you have the patience for it, the humor is really good. The other one, which is not a novel that I know many people that have read, because my other favorite sport besides basketball is tennis, and there's just so much drama in tennis, and it's such a lonely sport, I suppose, unless you're playing doubles. But it's a novel called Double Fault by Lionel Shriver, and the main character is a female tennis player who becomes romantically involved with an up-and-coming male tennis player who is in every way her inferior until they start dating, and then she gets injured, and it's really a lot more complicated than my description makes it sound. And then one of my favorites is a basketball novel by a Portland writer, my friend Tim Lane. It's called Rules for Becoming a Legend, and it's just maybe 5 or 6 years old, and it's another one of those sports novels that really has limited page time in the basketball, but it's this multifaceted narrative with different shifting points of view, and you get the mother, the girlfriend, the son, the father, and it's a multi-generational. It's just a really ambitious and really just really memorable prose as well. But anyway, that's our reading corner.
Rules for Becoming a Legend.
Yeah.
What was his first name?
Timothy Lane.
Timothy Lane.
Yeah, and he's in Portland, and it takes place in Oregon too. Cool. It came, I think, from Viking, maybe 2014 or 15, but highly recommend that. And how are we doing on time? Should we start taking questions from folks, or should we keep chatting?
Looks like Courtney just addressed that. Yeah, let's take questions if people have questions.
Hello. JT, you have a very active audience. They have a lot of questions for you. So we'll start at the beginning. The first question is, just wanted to say your book cover design is stunning. What was your experience like publishing with Ooligan?
My experiences with Ooligan have been awesome. Part of the reason that I submitted to Ooligan is because I knew that the people carrying out most of the operations were graduate students. And in my experience, graduate students are the most engaged and intelligent, not just readers, but readers and workers that I've encountered. I also remember when I was a grad student being just so, just riveted with the idea of the enterprise that I was engaged in. And so I had that conception, and Ooligan has done nothing but confirm it. The part that I was most impressed by was the insight and intelligence with which they read my initial manuscript and gave me feedback. I've read manuscripts for my writer friends and given feedback, and it's hard to do with the kind of thoroughness and, how do I put this? Ooligan understood what I was trying to accomplish, even though I hadn't accomplished it fully. And the editors at Ooligan, I worked with a lot of them, but particularly Des Hewson, had a generous and accurate vision of what I was trying to accomplish and concrete suggestions for how to execute it better. So I was just really kind of blown away by the level of insight that they provided. The rest of the process was also just a delight. I mean, they did so much work on my behalf, from the cover design to the interior design and everything else. It's been a great experience. If any of you have unpublished manuscripts, I would strongly recommend sending it to Ooligan. Besides that, there are a lot of independent publishers that have extremely small teams. And those publishers are heroic for the amount of labor that they do. Ooligan has a huge team that's doing design and publicity and acquisitions and development and editing. It's really just, it's a really impressive operation. And I was kind of blown away at every stage of the process.
Let me give a shout out real quick to another Ooligan book from a year or two ago by Matt Tompkins called Oddsberg, which was really cool.
It has a fantastic cover. Fantastic. Yeah.
What a cool program. I did not know about that. Okay, the next question is from Ben Bushnell. And they asked, what did you enjoy most about the process of writing, finishing, publishing your novel? And on the contrary, what was the largest struggle?
Okay, so Ben is my brother living in Montana. I don't get to see him very often. Hi, Ben. Good to hear from you. Will you repeat the first part of that question? I remember the biggest struggle part.
Yeah. What did you enjoy most about the writing, finishing, and publishing process of your novel?
I think the writers in the room, in the virtual room, will know I am telling the truth when I say that what I enjoyed the most, and often what was driving me forward, was the idea of writing an acknowledgements page. Because it's not just the people who helped me achieve this novel, but because it's my debut novel, it's really a testament to everyone in my entire life who has helped guide and influence me toward this, the completion of this project, and really this life that I've forged for myself. From my mom and dad and brothers to my high school teachers and college teachers and graduate school teachers and my family now. The amount of gratitude that you have for these people as you near completion of a project is overwhelming, and the idea of putting that gratitude in print is deeply meaningful. So that's my answer. The biggest struggle, the biggest struggle was probably in the revision stages, having to close the door on my daughter when she was calling out for me. And maybe second on that list would be the first 600 pages that I wrote and threw away before I found the first line.
Okay, awesome. The next question is from Vicky Burton, and they asked,
Were there any characters you had trouble turning off in your mind when the novel was finished, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, and the answer is sadly no. Like when I was away from the novel, I did not have any trouble cutting myself off from it. And I actually think that's a good thing. I'm a big believer in the power of the subconscious to continue developing things when your conscious mind is not occupied with them. So, I run long distances, and people often think that this is a chance for me to think about my novel or think about stories or, develop the plot or the characters in my mind. And that might be happening while I'm running, but not in my conscious mind. In fact, running is kind of the way that I wash that stuff out of me. So I never had any trouble while I was away from the novel letting go of it. But there were characters who, when I sat down at my desk and started a few sentences, who just kind of seemed to come alive on their own, and I would just sort of watch what they were doing and report on them. And the biggest character that operated that way was Tanya, the one who's everyone's favorite. She seemed to have a life of her own. And although she wasn't taking over my thoughts away from the desk, she was a big presence while I was at the desk, for sure.
Okay. Heidi Schultz asks, I'm curious about your process about writing some of these characters and the settings for the story. You paint incredible pictures with your characters and backdrops, and I'm wondering if, as you write, you have specific details you want to include and you intentionally orient to those, or if they become more clear as you're writing in the zone.
Yeah. Hi, Heidi. Thank you for the question. Let's see. I don't, when things are going well, I don't drive the writing toward anything intentionally. When the writing's going poorly, I have to, because I don't know where, it's just kind of part of my process. But when it's going well, I just sort of create situations that I understand the ingredients of. I understand who the people are. I understand what they want. I understand what's standing in the way, and I understand where they are. And then I just sort of close my eyes and let my mind get quiet and see what occurs to me. The writing goes badly when I don't trust what occurs to me, when I try to think what should happen or what would be the best. That defeats me. And it goes the best when I'm really able to turn off my conscious mind. So I try to put my stories, including this novel, in arenas that I understand. For example, you witnessed Ed doing newspaper work. I understand that work because I was on the college newspaper staff. So I do intentionally set it in that environment, not to accomplish something specific, but to allow me to kind of turn my mind off and trust my instincts so that I can close my eyes and like look around a newspaper room and know what's there. Because the less conscious straining I do, the more the story seems to cohere and take off. So I put it in specific arenas intentionally, and then just sort of let what comes come.
Awesome.
When it's going well.
And it's going well, is that what you said?
When it's going well. When it's not, I do other things.
Okay. Kara, or Kara, sorry, either way, says, hi, JT. I taught your brevity essays instincts for years and continue to be so moved by it. Do you still write personal essays? How do you choose what to write as a memoir and what to channel into fiction?
Hi, Kara, or Kara. Kara is my first fan and was for a long time my only fan. She sent me a Facebook message asking if I, friend fans. And I was like, what's a fan? Anyway, so no, I don't really write memoir anymore. I tried for a while. For me, when I write memoir, it just doesn't have the magic that fiction does. It's not about what I produce necessarily. It's just that when I'm engaged in it, it doesn't carry me away like fiction does. That said, I have written a couple memoirish pieces recently, but it's like a writing memoir. It's like, I mean, one was the piece that the other JT referenced, Stopping Writing, was a personal essay and a memoir about my experiences writing. I have another one recently in Fiction Writers Review, basically about about writing memoir and showing it to my family. So I don't really do it anymore. When I do, whether it's the stuff I wrote earlier, like the stuff you saw in Brevity, or the stuff that I'm writing now about writing, I write memoir when I know what I want to say. There's an experience that I know what it means, or I know how it's changed me, and I just, like, I know what's there, and I just have to say it. I write fiction when I don't know what I want to say, when there's something that compels me or absorbs me or interests me, but I have no idea, message is the wrong term, but like what theme I want to develop or what I have to say about the topic. Fiction is a way to sort of indulge that obsession and explore and arrive at what I have to say. Really good questions. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, you have a very engaged audience. Okay, another question is from Anonymous. Do you have a favorite sports story / film that has inspired you?
I mean, I already mentioned The Natural by Bernard Malamud. So I have a couple alternate answers. The problem is I don't know the names of either one. So right before I started writing this novel, I read a short story in one of the journals that one of my short stories was published in that treated athletes all wrong. And I've seen a lot of stories do this, where like the athlete in the story is like the character who has everything and gets everything and is always a winner. And I remember reading it and thinking that is such BS. Like, anyone who has played sports has confronted loss, has engaged in sacrifice, has had to acknowledge their own limitations. And this is true even of like figures like Michael Jordan, who eventually becomes old Michael Jordan, like not good enough to play in the league anymore. Every athlete confronts their limitations and confronts losses and confronts discipline and sacrifice. And it I guess riled me up a little bit. You can probably hear it in my voice. But another way of saying that is it inspired me to correct that version of sports, which I tried to do with this novel. The other answer is, I don't know what this movie was called, but when I was a kid, when I was maybe 14, I saw this movie where there's this old like knuckleball pitcher toiling through the minor leagues, and this young fireballer comes up, who's going to make it big, but he needs to find his way. And the knuckleballer mentors the young one, and in the process, the knuckleballer dies. And I remember this scene so vividly in this movie, where the young fireballer suddenly grips the baseball in a certain way, like the old guy, and it's like this communion with the other character and this homage to the other character. And I remember at the age of 14 or whatever, is the first time this has happened to me, just like being wrecked by it. And it would probably be really cheesy if I watched it now, but I just remember just weeping uncontrollably at this moment in sports, at this sports story. And I really think that is the power of sports, is that the pitch that he throws, like taken objectively, has so little significance in the world. But the movie, at least for my 14-year-old self, infused that moment with so much emotional power that it really got into me. And I think sports stories, when they're operating at their best, that's how they treat sports.
Okay. Celeste Miller has two questions back to back. So the first question is, no spoilers, but wondering how hard it was to write the end of the book and the part about the dogs. And I'll let you answer that, and then I'll read the next one.
The part about the dogs. Which part about the dogs? So the end of the book was, it was a struggle in the way that all the pages of the book were, in that I throw away a lot of work. I give myself permission to let it be bad, and then I write badly, and then I throw it away. This is especially true of the end. I wrote, the first version I wrote of this, I took a wrong turn at about page 150, and I didn't realize it until 200 pages later. So I had to throw away those 200 pages and come back to the point where I'd gone wrong. And it was really difficult to sort of reorient myself in that moment, and to detach from the grooves that had already been embedded in the road ahead of me. So that was a really difficult aspect of wrenching it toward this new direction and this new ending. The moment with the dogs. I don't know what moment.
There was, someone said the fight, and then someone said at the end when he goes to find his dog. Those were the dogs.
Fight, okay. The fight was a lot of fun. I'd actually just written an article about how to write trauma and the way that fear alters the way our minds function and our memories form. So the fight scene was an opportunity to sort of engage in the strategies that I had been writing about. And I, as I often do in first drafts, I took it a little too far. I went a little too slow. I added a little too much detail, and I pared it back later with the help of Des and the other Ooligan editors. But no, it was a lot of fun to sort of get into the details of how this fight plays out. You often think of a fight as just this like blur of action, and it required actually going through each series of movements within the blur. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Okay, and then her other question is, did you do research on ways to write about a woman coming out late in life, and how did you ensure that you wrote authentically about it as a man?
Mm-hmm.
Thought you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's a hard question. So, I mean, when you write any story, you have to write about people who don't resemble you, just because, whether you're a white male or black woman or whatever, it's a rare story that every single character is like that. So a few ways that I attempted to accomplish this is, number one, just with general compassion and empathy and imagination. I mean, imagine, closing your eyes and really trying to embody someone else's experience, I think is something that we're all capable of. And I think it's one of the best aspects of writing fiction, is that it requires it of us constantly. That was one aspect. Another aspect was experience. I have experience not with a mother coming out, but I do have experience with a roommate coming out as gay. He was male, she's female, but a lot of the anxieties and forces that I witnessed in him, I think, are applicable. And I think this is true of any scene that you write. I mean, how do you know what it's like to feel jealousy? Well, how do you know what it's like to feel pride? I mean, you sort of mine your experiences and your observations, and you apply general principles of imagination and empathy. I did research a few aspects. For example, in early drafts, the mother didn't leave the family for another woman. She just left. And what I came to understand through research is that's actually really rare, that usually women who come out, who are in heterosexual marriages, usually they, not always, but usually they have met someone else. And that's the sort of impetus for their departure from their family. So little aspects like that, I did research and try to work in to make it more authentic. I mean, I think those are the ingredients for writing any scene: imagination and empathy, experience, and book research or interviews.
She also said she thought you did it very well, by the way.
Thank you, Celeste.
We do have a good few more questions. I'm happy to stay over time and ask them. But if anyone needs to leave at 8, I think you have a little note you want to let everyone know about before people start leaving.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah.
So I will be in Grassroots tomorrow from 3:30 to 5, signing books and selling books. If you want to come by and say hello, or you want to get my signature, please stop by. If you've already ordered the book online from Grassroots, we can also manage to get you a signature in that book tomorrow, which maybe Courtney can say more about in a moment. But come by and say hello. I would love to see you. We're also going to celebrate. By celebrate, I mean, I'm going to grab a table and order a beer at Block 15 in Southtown. If you'd like to stop by and join me for a beer there, or I'll have a pin with me there too if anyone wants a signature.
Yeah, and on top of that, if we run out of stock copies, we have book plates that he's going to initial and personalize as well, that if you order a book online or if you order it with us in store because we ran out, he's happy to personalize those as well, and we'll make sure those get into your copy of your book when they're ordered at Grassroots. Okay, and if you want to stay, we have a few more questions. It's up to you today.
Well, I know it's late on the East Coast, James.
I'm happy to stick around. Go for it.
I'm happy to stick around too. This is a lot of fun for me. But I know that everyone else has lives to attend to, and that Zoom has its limits on people's attention. So please go attend to your lives. But if you want to stick around, I'll be happy to answer more questions.
Okay. So we're going to continue with the questions then. Feel free to stay. So the next question is from Rob, and Rob asks, did you take any classes in high school or college that have helped you with your writing?
Any classes in high school or college? I mean, the classes I took in high school did help me. I mean, I remember some specific lessons from my classes in high school, but what they mostly did, and what I think that classes are mostly good for in high school and often beyond college, in college, is they inspired me. They showed me what stories and what fiction and what narrative are capable of. For example, I remember my 9th grade English teacher I remember a lot of things, but the one that I'll mention is, I remember at the end of the year, she handed me a book by David James Duncan called The Brothers K, because she knew I liked baseball. And I said, oh, thank you. And I read it over the summer, and I brought it back for the next year. And she said, no, that's yours. That's for you. And that moment really sort of startled me and meant a lot to me. Yes, brilliant recommendation. I know, it was such a perfect book for me. But the act of giving a book also meant a lot to me. And it sort of showed me the social fabric that is, books are capable of weaving. Another moment that really stuck with me in high school was when my 11th grade English teacher, Laura Nordquist, I don't remember what book she was reading. It might've been Great Gatsby, it might've been Of Mice and Men, but I remember she'd read us a passage and she would have to stop because she got choked up. And to see her up there having this kind of emotional response to a story was profoundly impactful, to the degree that I remember it happening now, decades later. So in high school, it was really these moments more than anything that taught me, not necessarily about writing, but taught me what writing could accomplish and taught me what writing and stories meant to me. Yeah, I just saw Lori mention Ehud, who also had an impact, and so did you, Lori. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of moments. In college, I didn't study creative writing much. I took one creative writing class and just thought it was a blast. But to me, it was like I also took a volleyball class, which was also a blast. Volleyball didn't really, have much academic relevance to me. And I thought that creative writing was the same way. I see that much differently in retrospect, but I thought it was playing, whereas my other classes were more serious. So I absolutely learned things, but more I learned myself and my reaction to these subjects. Thanks, Rob. Glad you could make it. Tell your mother hello.
Okay, 2 more. what subject do you teach? And does that influence your creative process and the way you see the world / your characters?
So I teach a lot of subjects. And yeah, they all influence me. I teach grammar. I'm a former copy editor, and I teach grammar. And I think that anyone who has studied grammar or been a copy editor knows that it influences the way you see the world, and that the world, after you have engaged in this process, suddenly seems like a very hostile place to correctness. It's, maybe it's just that people who go into copy editing or grammar have compulsive personalities, but you see errors in print, on type, on signs, and they just they get you. And I try to avoid this reaction because I think it's a privileged reaction. But I can avoid how I respond to these situations, but I can't avoid the grating sense that I get when I encounter errors in print. So that affects me. I also teach composition, argumentation, literature, creative writing. The way that absolutely these things affect my view of the world. Studying literature is an avenue for developing the breadth of your experience in the world and the breadth of your observation of the world and your own capacity for compassion. I think that, like a lot of people, I am a naturally selfish person, and it's something that I've observed, acknowledged, and tried to work on, partly because of the lessons that I've learned through literature. I'm someone who didn't grow up with religion. I don't have religion still. I'm fine with that, but it left sort of a gap in my moral instruction growing up. And for me, literature fills that gap. And teaching literature is just an intensive study of literature. And so it helps me advance in that way further. Yeah, I suppose that's a long enough answer.
All right. A short one from Heidi. Is Rick Riley still your favorite sports writer?
Boy, that is a perceptive question with a lot of history behind it, and shows that Heidi has a really good memory. The answer is no. I haven't read Rick Riley in a long time, and I think I would probably view his column a little bit differently if I read it today. To be honest, I don't read a lot of sports writers today, except the people who cover the Blazers. I read constantly because I'm obsessed, for better or worse, with the Blazers. But no, I don't read sports writing like that anymore. I see Mike's question, do you believe the Portland Trail Blazers? But that's all I can see.
Do you believe the Portland Trail Blazers can keep the 6th seed?
Yeah, they'll keep the 6th seed, but it doesn't matter. The direction that they're going right now is they're treading water, and things are. We've seen this season's story before. They will, whether they get the 5 seed or the 6 seed or the 7 seed, they'll bow out in the first round, and they've refused to make the changes necessary to advance the franchise. So yes, but who cares is my answer. This probably has limited appeal to most of the audience, but
okay.
No, I don't read a lot of sports writing anymore.
Okay, last question. Okay, 2 more questions because I do want to know. Are you working on anything new?
No.
Okay.
I wish the answer was different, but I don't have the time during the pandemic. There are other things that require my attention. I will work on something new when I have time.
Okay, and the last question. Since you've been working on this novel since 2010, goodness, did you notice a change in your writing style after you became a dad, whether intentional or otherwise? Thanks and congrats, JT. You're my hero. That's from Jason Gore.
Sorry, from Jason who?
Gore.
Gore. Hey, Gore, good to see you on here. My life changed a lot. My sense of identity changed a lot. My values changed a lot. My selfishness even changed a lot, in that your sense of what you want for yourself gets all wrapped up and confused with what you want for your kids. Like, before you're a father, or before you're a parent, you imagine being woken up or having to stay up with your child, getting a lack of sleep. You imagine it as this horrific thing, but when you become a parent, and I should qualify this by saying my wife does a lot more of this than I do, and I appreciate every time she does it. But when your child cries, you want to go to them. It's fulfilling and meaningful to go to them. And so what is for yourself and what is not for yourself gets confused. I've changed a lot in that way. My writing has not changed, except that I don't do it anymore. But no, my perspective on writing is mostly the same. I mean, I guess I see it as, an arena apart from my daily identity. A lot like an athlete probably does. When they hit the floor, they're one person, or the court or the field, they're one person. And when I have a wasp in here, I don't know how that happened. But you're one person in your daily life, you're another person on the field. And I think that's kind of true of writing as well. So that identity and that approach has not really changed.
Okay, one more question from Lori, because it is a very important question. So your last question, Ehud would want to know, how is the beer?
The beer is excellent. If you're not familiar with Block 15 beer, you better get familiar, because it is, it's fantastic. In fact, I'm gonna have another one right now. The beer is great. I miss Ehud. Ehud was one of my mentors, along with Lori, in graduate school at University of Oregon. And he died before he had the chance to read this novel. And when he was still alive, we met at Squirrels and we had beers, and he would offer to read my manuscript. But he was the most savage critic I have ever run across. Not savage, and everything he said was true. It wasn't savagery for the point of savagery. It was just an uncanny ability to slice your story open and eviscerate it and perform an autopsy. So when he offered to read it, I knew it wasn't ready for him yet. So I always said, not yet, not yet, not yet. And he died before I was able to give it to him. So it's a big regret. Another person from the acknowledgements, Isabel Brock, also died before she was able to see the final version. And those two figures loom large in my mind as I published this. In fact, they were on my mind a lot the day that I got the box of books and opened it, and that some of you have seen on video. Thanks, Lori.
All right. Wow. Thank you both so much. JT, James, it's been great having you for hosting your book launch. It's been fabulous. This conversation was super fun to listen to. Super great questions from your audience. I don't think I've had this active of an audience with that many questions. So Grassroots is super happy to host you. We had such a great time. Feel free to stop by the store tomorrow and get your book signed by JT. And if not, and you can always buy his book online at grassroots.com, at our bookstore. We'd always be happy to see you. All right. And thank you, JT and James, for tonight.
Thank you so much for hosting. And JT, I'm honored to be here with you on launch day.
Thank you, JT. I appreciate it, especially staying up late in North Carolina.
It's all right.
Nice to finally meet you.
I feel like I'm in my 30s again.
If only, right?
Yeah. Best of luck with the book, and I hope it brings back all those good feelings that bring out some new ideas and some new time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I can't wait to read Blind Man's Bluff.
Thank you.
If you haven't heard about it, it looks like a really exciting book from a really great publisher. Can't wait to get my hands on it. Thank you, JT.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Yep. Everyone else too.